In March 1944, Staff Sergeant Thomas Langford of the 351st Bombardment Group knelt on the concrete floor of Barracks 9 at Stalag Luft 4 in Gross Teichau, Pomerania. The nail he pressed against the stone weighed less than half an ounce. It smelled of rust. 3 weeks later, 2 guards were pulled from a night patrol with lacerations. The camp surgeon could not match to any tool recovered from the barracks. The evidence log filed that spring left one line blank. At number 21, a weapon disguised as a piece of stove iron fooled the guards for 5 months, until it put one of them in the infirmary. And at number 3, the blade a sergeant carried out of Stalag 7A weighed less than a deck of cards and still sits in a family's attic outside Dayton. These are the weapons the wire hid, and the Geneva Convention never imagined. Number 25. Private First Class Raymond Holt of the 36th Infantry Division had been inside Stalag 7A at Moosburg for 11 weeks when a guard found a sharpened mess tin lid wrapped in a strip of wool blanket tucked beneath his mattress in January 1943. The lid had been ground against the barracks foundation until one edge held a bevel 3 inches long. The steel was thin, a mess tin weighed 9 ounces whole, and Holt's piece was less than a third of that. Camp regulations at Moosburg classified any sharpened metal as a weapon regardless of its original purpose, and the punishment was 14 days in solitary on reduced rations. Holt served the full 2 weeks. The confiscated lid was logged into the camp evidence locker with a notation that translated to modified food utensil. That locker was emptied and its contents buried in a pit outside the camp perimeter in April 1945, 2 weeks before the 14th Armored Division rolled through the gate. Number 24. Sergeant William Jessup of the 1st Infantry Division kept a wool sock filled with wet sand inside his coat lining at Outlawed 64 in Subin, Poland, through the winter of 1943. The finished weight was just under 2 pounds. It looked like nothing, a sock with a knot tied at the open end, and it passed 3 barracks inspections because the guards were searching for metal. Jessup's bunkmate, Corporal Dean Mackey, later told a debriefer at Camp Lucky Strike that the sand had to be dampened every few days to keep its weight. The tool was never confiscated. Jessup carried it on the forced march out of Subin in January 1945 when the Germans evacuated the camp ahead of the Soviet advance, and somewhere on the road between Subin and the railhead at Swinemünde, he dropped it in a ditch without saying a word. Mackey said he never brought it up again. Number 23. At Stalag Luft 3 in Sagan, Silesia, a section of barbed wire pulled from the inner perimeter fence turned up during a barrack search in August 1943 wound into a coil 16 inches long. It belonged to Technical Sergeant Arthur Finn of the 91st Bombardment Group. The wire had been twisted until it formed a double strand with a loop at each end, a configuration the German security officer recognized immediately. Finn was placed in the camp's cooler for 21 days, and the commandant issued a written order requiring all wire sections found inside the compound to be reported to the Abwehr liaison, not handled locally. Before Finn's arrest, confiscated wire had been logged as scrap. After it, every piece was cataloged with a sketch. That order stayed in effect through the rest of the war, and copies survived in the Sagan camp records, recovered by British intelligence in 1945. Number 22. Private George Stannard of the 29th Infantry Division never saw his own weapon again after the morning of June 1944, when he sharpened a 4-inch nail pulled from his bunk frame against the latrine drain cover at Stalag 12A in Limburg. The nail weighed a fraction of an ounce and fit inside a seam he had opened in the waistband of his trousers. Stannard was moved 3 times between Limburg and a work detail near Berga before the war ended. The shiv stayed in that waistband through every transfer. When troops of the 6th Armored Division liberated the survivors at Berga in April 1945, a medic cataloging the men's belongings found the nail and included it in a box of personal effects shipped to the Stannard family in Norfolk, Virginia. His daughter found it in 1978, still inside the folded trousers, and did not understand what she was holding. Number 21. Sergeant Patrick Brogan of the 94th Bombardment Group found a broken grate iron from the barracks coal stove at Stalag Luft 6 in Hadekrug, Lithuania, in the autumn of 1943. The bar was 14 inches long, weighed 1.5 pounds, and had a natural curve from its years inside the firebox. Brogan hid it behind a loose section of wall paneling for 5 months, and no inspection turned it up. In March 1944, a guard discovered it during a wall-by-wall search, triggered by an unrelated escape attempt. The guard who lifted the panel was struck across the forearm, by whom was never established, and spent 2 days in the camp infirmary with a hairline fracture. Brogan was identified through bunk proximity and transferred to the punishment barracks. The iron itself was photographed for the camp's incident file, one of the few improvised weapons at Heidekrug to receive that treatment, and the photograph survived in a collection donated to the Imperial War Museum in 1961. Number 20. At Stalag 2B in Hammerstein, Pomerania, Technical Sergeant Floyd Ogden of the 388th Bombardment Group carried a piece of tin cut from a ration can with a serrated edge for 11 months, beginning in September 1943. The tin measured 4 inches by 2 inches and weighed less than an ounce. He kept it flat inside the cardboard cover of a pocket Bible, a King James edition printed in 1939 with a spine just thick enough to hide the metal. The serrations were shallow. A camp doctor later estimated they could break skin but not muscle, and Ogden never used it. Camp standing orders at Hammerstein classified any modified metal as contraband subject to confiscation and 21 days of reduced rations. But the orders assumed metal would be found during inspection, and no guard at Hammerstein ever asked a prisoner to open a Bible. Ogden was liberated in April 1945 and processed through Camp Lucky Strike. The piece of tin was not listed among his personal effects. His family said he mentioned the war seldom, and the Bible survived without its cover. Number 19. Staff Sergeant Harold Kirby of the 306th Bombardment Group extracted a coil spring from the frame of his bunk at Stalag Luft 4 in Gross Teichau and bent the last 3 inches into a straight point. The spring steel was 5 inches long and stiff enough that it held its shape under pressure, strong enough, according to the confiscation report, to penetrate leather and light wood. He kept it inside a hollowed section of a wooden clog. Kirby had been shot down over Bremen in October 1943 and arrived at the camp with a fractured wrist that the German medical staff set but did not cast. In February 1944, a routine search turned up the clog, and the weapon was logged into the compound's confiscation ledger as Item 209. The ledger entry noted the spring's measurements. The weapon itself was listed as destroyed. When the British Army overran the area in 1945, the confiscation ledger was recovered, and Item 209 was noted present in the log, but absent from the evidence room. No explanation accompanied the discrepancy. Number 18. Corporal James Mulvaney of the 45th Infantry Division found a section of lead water pipe behind Barracks 14 at Stalag 7A in Moosburg in the spring of 1943. The pipe was 9 inches long and weighed 1 pound 4 ounces, heavy enough that holding it in one hand for more than a minute left the fingers stiff. He wrapped one end in strips of cotton torn from a shirt to form a grip. Mulvaney had been captured during the Sicily campaign the previous July and had spent 8 months watching the camp's routines before he decided the pipe was worth the risk. He carried it under his mattress for 3 months before a bunkmate warned him that the guards had received a tip from a prisoner in a neighboring barracks. He threw the pipe into the camp's latrine pit the night before a barracks inspection in August. The search found nothing. Mulvaney told his son in Trenton, New Jersey, years after the war, that the sound of that pipe hitting the waist below was the only thing about the camp he could still hear clearly. Number 17. Flight Officer Daniel Creighton of the 357th Fighter Group built a projectile device from a bed frame crossbar and a doubled strand of wire at Stalag Luft 1 in Barth, Mecklenburg, in the winter of 1944. Creighton had been shot down over occupied France in November 1943 and transferred to Barth by rail. The crossbar served as the stock, the wire as the propulsion, and sharpened dowel pins taken from a bunk joint served as bolts. The full assembly was 22 inches long and weighed just under 3 pounds. A guard discovered it during a surprise inspection in March. The commandant at Barth called it the most elaborate contraband recovered in the compound that year, and the senior German officer ordered a new protocol. Every bunk frame in the camp was to be inspected weekly for missing hardware, and any absent crossbar or pin was to be reported within 24 hours. That protocol generated a paper trail that survived in the Barth camp records and was referenced in a post-war British intelligence summary on improvised weapons in Luftwaffe-administered camps. Number 16. First Lieutenant Albert Novak of the 34th Infantry Division sharpened the brass tongue of his belt buckle against the stone floor of his cell at Outlawed 64 in Subin during October 1943. The tongue measured 1 3/4 inches and came to a point narrow enough to puncture canvas. Novak had been wearing the same belt since his capture in Tunisia 6 months earlier, and the buckle was standard Army issue, one of roughly 4 million produced by the Hickok Manufacturing Company between 1941 and 1944. A guard found the modified buckle during a pat-down search after Novak was caught near the perimeter wire one evening. The modification was cited as evidence of escape intent, and Novak was transferred from the general population at Subin to a punishment block in Outlawed 79 at Brunswick, where his privileges, including Red Cross parcel receipt, were suspended for 60 days. The buckle was retained by the Subin Commandant's office and never returned. Number 15. At Stalag 3B in Furstenberg, under Oder, Private First Class Leonard Russo of the 3rd Infantry Division broke a pane of glass from the barracks washroom window in December 1942 and selected a shard 6 inches long. He wrapped the thick end in layers of torn blanket until the handle was solid enough to grip. The blade edge, where the glass had fractured, was thin enough to slice paper. Russo kept the weapon hidden inside a crack in the wall behind his bunk for the duration of his captivity. When Soviet forces overran the area in February 1945, Russo and the other Western Allied prisoners were moved west. The glass was left behind. In 1963, workmen renovating the site for agricultural use found the shard, still wrapped in its rotted cloth handle, wedged into the masonry. A local museum in Brandenburg cataloged it as an artifact of the former camp. Number 14. Sergeant First Class Martin Gale of the 82nd Airborne Division had a table leg from the mess hall at Stalag 2A in New Brandenburg. The leg was 18 inches long, turned from hardwood, and heavy enough that Gale put its weight at 2 pounds. He had carried it from the mess hall inside his trouser leg in November 1943. Walking the 200 yards back to his barracks with a limp he told a guard was a sore knee. He kept it beneath a loose floorboard until February 1944, when the senior American officer in the compound ordered all improvised weapons collected and destroyed ahead of an expected International Red Cross inspection. Gale and 11 other men handed over what they had. The items were broken apart and burned in the barracks stove overnight. The Red Cross delegation arrived 3 days later and noted no contraband in its report. Gale told a historian in 1971 that watching the table leg burn was worse than losing it because the fire meant they had agreed the rules were real. Number 13. Technical Sergeant Paul Whitfield of the 100th Bombardment Group wore a pair of wooden clogs issued at Stalag Luft 3 in Sagan, and inside the right clog, pressed flat between the wooden sole and the leather upper, was a razor blade taken from a guard's discarded shaving kit. The blade measured 1.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch. Whitfield kept it from September 1943 until liberation in April 1945, 19 months without detection. No inspection ever asked prisoners to remove their clogs. After the war, Whitfield carried the clog home to Boise, Idaho, and it sat on a shelf in his garage until his death in 1982. His grandson donated it to the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force in Savannah in 2003, where the blade was discovered during conservation and is now displayed beside the clog with a placard that does not mention how long Whitfield had carried it. Number 12. At Stalag 17B in Krems, Austria, Corporal Vincent Daly of the 44th Bombardment Group stretched a length of rubber cut from a truck inner tube between the arms of a forked branch smuggled in from a work detail in the summer of 1944. The tube section measured 11 inches unstretched. It was capable of throwing a pebble hard enough to dent a mess tin at 20 feet. A guard confiscated the device in October, and the confiscation receipt described it as a child's toy constructed from wood and rubber. That description stayed in the file. The camp records at Krems, recovered after liberation, show the receipt alongside a separate internal memorandum, written 3 days later, identifying the device as a projectile weapon of the type classified as prohibited under Standing Camp Order 14. The memorandum recommended disciplinary action. The receipt said toy. The memorandum said, "Weapon. Daily, receive no punishment." Number 11. Sergeant Robert Cahill of the 2nd Armored Division kept a length of braided wire 12 inches long inside the lining of his greatcoat at Stalag 12A in Limburg through the winter of 1944. The wire was thin, stripped from a section of the camp's internal communication line, and he had twisted it into a 3-strand braid with a small loop at each end. The finished braid was no thicker than a bootlace. It weighed almost nothing. Cahill had been captured during the Battle of the Bulge in December and had been in the camp less than 3 months when the Americans arrived. He was liberated in March 1945 and returned to the United States through Camp Shanks in New York. He lived in Worcester, Massachusetts, for another 44 years. His wife told a researcher in 1989 that he brought almost nothing home from the war and that she had found nothing unusual in his belongings when she unpacked his kit bag that summer. She said he never once mentioned what he had kept inside his coat. Number 10. Private First Class. Edward Boone of the 28th Infantry Division drove 9 nails through a section of fence post 12 inches long at Stalag 12A in Limburg, creating a weapon the senior American non-commissioned officer in his barracks called the most dangerous thing he had seen inside a camp. Each nail protruded 1 inch. The post weighed 1.5 pounds with the nails in place. It was discovered during a snap inspection in October 1944, and the discovery prompted the Limburg commandant to request a formal review of his camp's compliance with the Geneva Convention provisions on prisoner discipline. That review, conducted by an officer from the Regional Military District in Wiesbaden, concluded that the weapon was evidence of systemic failure in barracks security. The review's recommendations, including increased guard patrols and monthly wall inspections, were implemented at 3 camps in the Limburg district before the war ended. If something in a drawer or a box in your family connects to any of this, hold that thought. There is a place for it at the end. Number 9. Corporal Stanley Merrick of the 4th Infantry Division pulled a sharpened stake from the camp's perimeter fence at Stalag 4B in Mühlberg, Saxony, in August 1944. The stake was 16 inches long, pointed at one end, and weighed just under 1 pound. The wood was pine, soft enough to sharpen, but hard enough to hold its point. He carried it inside a trouser leg during an escape attempt on the night of September 3rd, moving south toward the Czech border, which lay 35 miles from the camp. He made it 400 yards beyond the outer wire before a patrol dog found him in a drainage ditch. The stake was taken from him, and Marek was returned to the camp and given 28 days in solitary on half rations. The guard who recovered the stake buried it in the perimeter soil rather than log it. When the area was excavated for a memorial in 1992, several sharpened wooden objects were recovered from the soil around the former fence line, none of them identifiable to a specific prisoner. Number 8. At Stalag Luft 4 in Gross Teichau, Sergeant Kenneth Pryor of the 385th Bombardment Group removed a section of heating wire from the barracks wall in December 1943. The wire was 26 inches long and no thicker than the lead of a pencil. When connected to the barracks electrical circuit, the single outlet allocated for a reading lamp, the wire glowed hot enough to blister skin on contact, and Pryor used it to cut through a leather strap that secured a window shutter. A guard noticed the damaged strap during a morning inspection and traced the burn marks to an electrical source. Pryor was identified within the day. He lost his reading lamp privileges for 90 days and was moved to a barracks with no electrical outlet at all. A punishment his bunkmates considered worse than solitary, because the long Pomeranian winter left that barracks dark by 3:30 in the afternoon. The wire was confiscated, and the incident was noted in the camp's quarterly security summary as the first recorded use of electrical current as a tool in the Gross Teichau compound. Number 7. Staff Sergeant Thomas Langford, the same man who knelt on that concrete floor in Barracks 9, had spent 4 weeks working the handle of an aluminum spoon against the foundation stone until the tip held a point narrow enough to push through boot leather. The handle was 5 inches long and weighed less than 2 ounces. The spoon's bowl had been snapped off and discarded in the latrine so that what remained looked like nothing more than a bent piece of scrap. Langford kept the tool inside a seam in his flight jacket from March through August 1944. He was never searched closely enough for it to be found. When Stalag Luft 4 was evacuated in February 1945 and the prisoners were marched west, Langford carried the handle the entire distance. He came home to Scranton, Pennsylvania, in June 1945 and put the spoon handle in a cigar box on his dresser. His son found it in 1983, 2 years after Langford's death, and did not know what it was until a neighbor who had served in the Pacific recognized the shape. Number 6. Sergeant First Class Lawrence Dunn of the 1st Armored Division collected 11 links from a broken chain used to secure the gate of the exercise yard at Stalag 7A in Moosburg over the course of 4 months in 1943. Each link measured 1.25 inches. He threaded them onto a braided cord made from bootlaces and attached the cord to a wooden handle carved from a broom shaft. The finished weapon was 14 inches long and weighed 1 pound 2 ounces. Dunn kept it wrapped in a towel inside his kit bag. He carried it out of Moosburg at Liberation in April 1945 and brought it home to Camden, New Jersey. In 1951, at a reunion of his former battalion at a VFW hall in Philadelphia, Dunn produced the flail from a duffel bag and set it on a table in front of 6 men who had been in the same barracks. None of them had known it existed. Number 5. At Outlawed 64 in Subin, Poland, 1st Lieutenant Howard Pruitt of the 34th Infantry Division melted a piece of lead flashing peeled from the barracks roof into the shape of a fist-sized weight with 4 raised ridges across the striking surface. He used the barracks stove as a crucible, working at night when the guards reduced their interior patrols. The finished piece weighed 11 ounces and fit inside a closed hand. A tip from another prisoner led to a search in May 1944, and Pruitt hid the weight at the bottom of the camp's disused well, wrapped in oilcloth. The well was sealed after the camp was evacuated in January 1945. When Polish authorities drained the well in 1953, during reconstruction of the site, the oilcloth bundle was recovered. Its contents were not identified in the municipal report, and no one connected the lead piece to the former prison camp. Number 4. Corporal Frank DeLuca of the 36th Infantry Division found that the steel key used to open Red Cross food tins, a small flat tab designed to roll back the lid, could be bent into a cutting edge barely 1.5 inches long. He modified one at Stalag 7A in Moosburg in November 1942 and carried it pressed flat inside the cover of a paperback novel. The blade was light enough that it registered no weight a man could feel in his hand. When a guard found a modified key on a different prisoner in the same compound in January 1943, the camp commandant ordered that all future Red Cross packages be opened by guards before distribution and the keys collected and destroyed. DeLuca's blade was never found. The new inspection protocol slowed parcel distribution across the camp by 2 days and remained in force until liberation. The International Committee of the Red Cross noted the delay in an inspection report filed in Geneva in the spring of 1943, attributing it to security concerns related to packaging materials. Number 3. Sergeant Jack Phelan of the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division used the handle of a standard-issue military toothbrush at Stalag 7A in Moosburg as the stock for a blade ground from a nail. The finished weapon was 4.5 inches long and weighed less than 3 ounces, lighter than a deck of playing cards. He kept it inside his boot from February 1943 until liberation in April 1945, a span of 26 months. No search detected it. The toothbrush blade was not confiscated, not surrendered, and not destroyed. Phelan carried it home to Dayton, Ohio, put it in a box in his attic, and left it there. His granddaughter found it in 2009 while clearing the house after his wife's death. The nail is still fixed to the handle, the box is still in the attic, and the family has declined 3 requests from collectors. Number 2. Corporal Michael Sweeney of the 106th Infantry Division wrapped a fist-sized piece of broken concrete inside a regulation Army blanket at Stalag 9B in Bad Orb, Hesse, twisting the blanket into a tight cylinder with the weight at one end. The concrete chunk weighed 14 ounces. Sweeney kept it rolled inside his bedding from December 1944 until February 1945. A guard discovered it during a barracks inspection, and the camp's records show the weapon was confiscated and listed as destroyed. Sweeney was given 7 days of reduced rations. In 1946, a Veterans Administration physician at a hospital in Baltimore found a rolled section of Army blanket with a smooth stone wrapped inside it among a box of personal effects belonging to an unnamed former prisoner of war who had been admitted for treatment of malnutrition. The VA hospital's intake records do not name the patient. The dates match. Number 1. At Outlawed 64 in Sharpened, Poland, Captain Richard L. Moore of the 135th Infantry Regiment, 34th Infantry Division, carved a crucifix from a piece of elm during the winter of 1943. The crucifix was 9 inches tall and weighed 12 ounces. It sat openly on a shelf above his bunk for the rest of his captivity. Through inspections, through 2 visits by the International Red Cross, and through the camp's evacuation in January 1945, no one examined it closely enough to find what was inside. When Elmore died in Scranton, Pennsylvania in 1971, his widow gave the crucifix to their parish church. It sat in a glass case in the vestibule for 31 years. In 2002, a parishioner cleaning the case dropped it. The base split open. Inside the hollowed shaft was a blade, 3.5 inches long, ground from a nail, wrapped in a strip of cloth that had not been touched since the day it was sealed. The crucifix is now in the National Museum of American History. The placard says it was made in a German prisoner of war camp. It does not say what is inside. Every one of these objects was made by a man who had already lost everything that matters: his weapon, his uniform, his name as a soldier, and built it back from what was left. A sharpened spoon handle is not a weapon any army would recognize. A sock full of sand is not something any manual covers. But the men who made them were not building weapons in any military sense. They were building proof that they were still soldiers, that captivity had not taken the last thing they owned, the decision to remain dangerous. If your grandfather or great-uncle came home from one of those camps, or if there is something in a drawer or a box that your family has never fully explained, leave a word about it below. These stories belong to the families that kept them, and the people who remember are almost gone. If you want to hear more from this channel, the screen has a way to make that happen, and the video beside it goes somewhere just as worth the telling.